Good afternoon. My name is Susan Cáceres, and I am pleased to welcome you to the RTI and Universal Screening Establishing Distance webinar on behalf of the National Center on Response to...
Pretty cool, because she said star 6 and star 7, but I thought she was talking to him.
The National Center on Response to Intervention is a technical assistance and dissemination center funded by the Office of Special Education Programs. The center's mission is to build the capacity of state education agencies to assist local education agencies in implementing proven and promising models for RTI. We are pleased you could join us today. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes, but before we hear from our presenter, we would like to review a few technical details about today's event and offer a few suggestions and guidelines. We trust that you have had success logging into the technology, but if you encounter any technical difficulties at any point during today's session, we ask that you contact the live meeting technical support staff at 1-866-493-2825. The number is posted in the Q&A window. Please use the question and answer window throughout this session to type any question regarding technical issues or presentation content. The Q&A tab is located at the top of your screen. Once you open the tab, in order to type in a question, place your cursor in the smaller box on the top. Type your question and click Ask. Please note that your anonymity is protected and no names will appear in the question box. If you prefer that your question be answered privately, please specify in the text box, and Dr. Heisted will pause twice during the session to read questions and provide oral answers. Please note that the webinar software only allows for you to type in one question unless your previous question already has been answered. We are pleased to have our event captioned in live time by a captioner who is joining us online today. You might have noticed that a special box popped up on your screen when you first entered the session. That is where you'll be able to access the real-time captioning transcript. You are prompted to enter your name and organization so that the captioner will have that information. We encourage you to resize the captioning window to a size that suits your needs. You may also move it to a more convenient location by clicking on the top of the box and dragging it with your mouse. If you prefer to view the captioning, please feel free to close out the window and it will disappear from your view. A quick note about the audio portion of the session. We will be recording this event so that it can be available online for those who missed it today. In order to produce the best quality recording, as we have noted, we have muted all the phone lines to minimize background noise. We are fortunate to have Dr. Dave Heisted, Executive Director of Research, Evaluation, and Assessment for the Minneapolis Public Schools with us today. His research foci include special education assessment and non-categorical services, value-added indicators of school performance, and teacher effects in reading. His current work focuses on the development and implementation of valid and equitable educational accountability indicators for school improvement. We are very fortunate he is sharing his expertise with us today. So I'd like to take this moment and welcome Dr. Heisted.
Thank you very much. This is Dave Heisted speaking from Minneapolis Schools. Before we get into the formal presentation, I'd like to give you just a little bit of background about our work here in Minneapolis. I've been the Director of Research and Evaluation for the last 12 years and have been doing research and evaluation for the past 22 years. First of all, I started out as a consultant for curriculum-based measurement. I worked with my colleague Doug Marston, who is kind of the guru of RTI here in Minneapolis. And we did norming of curriculum-based measures some 22 years ago. And since that time, we've developed benchmarks for all of our CBM instruments and a number of other district-wide assessments. So I'd like to just take you through the slides, and then, as was mentioned before, make sure to answer all of your questions as they pop up. You can see my address in case you want to contact me later. This presentation won't be very technical. If you have specific technical questions, please feel free to get a hold of me. The presentation is entitled RTI and Universal Screening, Establishing District-Wide Benchmarks. The outline of the webinar looks like this. We're going to start with basically a definition of universal screening. Then we're going to look at instruments and what they should be predicting, why we need to establish local benchmarks, and then a little bit on the methodology of establishing benchmarks. And then the majority of our time will be spent looking at the types of reports that are generated by RTI screening benchmarks and how these data can be used within the RTI model. First of all, when we're talking about universal screening, this is a brief assessment, assessments that are valid and reliable and evidence-based. They're conducted with all students or targeted groups of students to identify those who are at risk of academic failure and in need of additional support. This is the definition of the National Center on Response to Intervention. I've been working with the RTI Center and the American Institute on Research this past year, and we've been going through some of the screening instruments that are used nationwide and scoring those for their technical adequacy and their usefulness to districts. The first question we want to address is what criterion measures should be used? What do we actually want to predict with our screener? And we want to make sure that it's something very important. Early on in the 80s, many districts were using nationally normed multiple choice exams, and we were talking about what percent of the population nationally you wanted to perhaps refer for special education assessment. Since that time, we've moved towards much more of a standards-based approach. And starting in the late 90s, all states had to put together standards-based tests or use off-the-shelf tests that were designed to measure the state reading standards. But as you probably have seen before, the standards for various states vary tremendously. This is a graph that was taken from a study done by the USDA, and it shows that the standards as compared to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP, vary from Massachusetts as the highest standards in 4th grade, very close to the NAEP cut scores, down to Mississippi and Tennessee that were some of the lowest. Now, since that period of time, states have changed their standards and their tests, but you can see the tremendous variability. So if you have a screening instrument that was normed and calibrated against Tennessee standards, those cut scores that are used in the screener may not apply if you live in Massachusetts or South Carolina or Wyoming. So it's necessary that we look at what are the state standards that are in place in your district. It is also true that screening measures are not all created equal. I noted this when helping out with a study for the Minnesota Reading First, where they had data from our Minneapolis curriculum-based measures, which are in the first column of this slide, and then the DIBELS oral reading. And it turned out on the same 193 students, the average was 59 words per minute for our Minneapolis passages and 47 for the Dibbles passages. And so we know that not all oral reading passages are calibrated at the same level. So we do have to pay attention to establishing local benchmarks using our measures at the district level and then calibrating to the state test or whatever criterion measure is decided for your district. So each screening instrument needs to be verified, and if you have information from the vendor's technical manual, you need to check to see if those data really apply to your situation in your district. We need to verify the strength of association. Typically, this is a correlation of some type between the screener and the outcome measure. This information needs to be customized to the setting that we're going to use the screener in at the district level. In Minneapolis schools, we started with a basic assumption that it was important to read fluently and with comprehension by the end of third grade. And we used our Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment, the MCA test, as our criterion variable. And we had in place already a local test that we liked a lot that measures the standards in both reading and math. I'll talk about the reading here. And that was the Northwest Evaluation Association Levels Test. The original version we called the NALT, and now we're benchmarking kind of the Cadillac version of the Adaptive Levels Test, and it's called the MAP, the Measures of Academic Progress. So I'm just going to use this as an example for a local assessment that we want to link to a state test and then establish cutoff scores. The MAP is a computer adaptive assessment, and these types of assessments are gaining ascendancy throughout the country. They're very accurate in assessing students' level of achievement because there's a very large item bank, and which item the student sees next depends on how they did on the previous item. If you got the last item correct on the test, you get a more difficult question, and if you got the last item incorrect, you go to an easier item. And the assessment branches very quickly into questions that are difficult for the student, but not too difficult. Students who take a grade level test many times will find it too easy, and they may rush through the test very fast and find that they make a couple of dumb mistakes. That measurement isn't very accurate because it didn't get into the level of proficiency the student is at. Also, students that are below grade level will get very frustrated with a grade level test, and they'll end up randomly guessing if the test is too difficult. And a computer adaptive test then will get down to the level that the student is actually achieving at. The MAP test uses what's called a RIT scale, and that's just a scale score that's been vertically linked so that you can measure progress from grade 2 to 3 to 4, all the way up to grade 9. And in Minneapolis, we give this test in the fall, winter, and spring. So it can be used for universal screening right at the beginning of the year, and then we pick up another screening in the winter. The first step in benchmarking is to establish the reliability of the screening score. And we need to consider reliability for each of the types of measurement error that may be present in an instrument. If the instrument has more than one item, we need to look at the difficulty of the items and also see if there's a general level of correlation between the items. And these inter-item correlations are measured in a number of different ways. And just as you're reading the manual, you may see coefficient alpha mentioned. That's the most frequent type of reliability for inter-item. You may also see something called a generalizability coefficient. That's very similar to coefficient alpha. It may actually include the degree of difficulty of the items. If one item is more difficult than the other, that'll enter into the measurement error for a generalizability coefficient. And then there's something called IRT scaling, and in that case, you don't assume that measurement error is the same from student to student and from the middle of the scale to the top of the scale. And so IRT-based inter-item correlations can also be available. Basically, the correlation is just a coefficient that varies from 0 to 1, and the National Center on Response to Intervention has established a standard, which is 0.8 or above for all the reliability coefficients. And in Minneapolis, we try to get as close to 0.9 or above so that we have very little measurement error associated with our screeners. In this case, the MAP assessment publishes inter-item reliability of 0.94 to 95, which is very high. Using screening instruments with high reliability ensures that the students that are identified for intervention are consistent from one version of the assessment to another, if there are multiple forms, from one assessment time to another, and one rater to another. And reliability, as I mentioned, is a correlation coefficient that should be 0.8 or higher. All screeners should report test-retest reliability. This may be the most important form of reliability. We don't want to see a different list of students who need further intervention depending on when the student took the test. So most inter-rater reliability is done within a 2-week period of time, so you would retest the same students within 2 weeks. In the case of the MAP, they don't recommend giving the assessment more than 4 times a year, so we calculated the stability of test scores from the fall to spring, and we're looking at fall to winter scores right now, and we're getting a median of 0.88, so that's very high test-retest stability. In the case of the MAP, we don't have scorers or raters. The computer does all the calculations, so you tend not to report inter-rater reliability for computerized testing, but it's very important in other types of assessments like curriculum-based measures where the instrument is administered by humans, and you need to make sure that you have a high degree of inter-rater consistency. And the second major area of technical adequacy of a screener is validity. And not going into great detail here, there are several important types of validity. Construct validity would be that the screener truly measures what it's supposed to measure, and in this case, reading. If your screener correlated higher with accepted measures of math than it does reading, then you might have a problem with this construct validity. Concurrent validity would be at the same time, point in time in the year, getting a correlation with a highly accepted measure, a different measure at the same time. And then the most important area of validity for a screener really is predictive validity. Do the scores that you collect on all students in the fall correlate with an accepted measure of reading in the spring? And in this case, we took all of the MAP and NALT data consecutive years and looked at the concurrent validity with the state tests, found that It ranged from 0.69 to 0.86 with a median of 0.81. And again, the standard is 0.70. And then the predictive validity was also extremely high, and we saw predictive validity above 0.7 for all the grade levels, and for fall to spring as well as winter to spring. The study that we did first was grade 3, and looked at the MCA test, our state test for grade 3, the correlation between the RIT score and the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments was 0.86. And then we calculate what's called a classification accuracy. So that would be if you predict that the students will be high above the standard, are they actually above the standard when they take the comprehensive assessment? If you predict that they're below the standard, do they actually end up low? And the overall hit rate was about 87%. So to give you an idea of what the hit rate looks like, I'll be looking at some correlation coefficients coming up in the next section. But right now I'd like to stop and answer questions that you have at this point, and I'll go up to the top of my screen and see if we have any questions. Okay. Okay, I don't see any questions at this point. There was a question that came in before we started the presentation. That question was how this differs from comprehensive assessment that's done in preschool. And really, it's very similar. The preschool screeners that are required in most states from ages 3 to the time kids start school also have to be validated against accepted measures, usually beginning of kindergarten measures. And we try to identify students that really should be referred for special ed comprehensive assessment. It's a little bit different in that we don't have the whole range of RTI interventions in place in most cases for students who are above the cut score. And what we'd like to see in Minneapolis is a way to really do triage for students that aren't really candidates to be referred to special ed, but they really need a high-quality preschool program that develops literacy skills. So in that sense, the preschool screeners are very similar to an RTI screener you might use K through 12. Well, since I don't see any other questions at this point, I'm going to continue on with the presentation and show you the study that we did at grade 3 in predicting the state test. And this would be similar to a study that you could conduct at your own district. We only include students that have both the preschool, have both the screener in the fall and the state test in the spring in the analysis. And what we want to see, as I mentioned before, is that high scores on the screener correspond with high scores on the criterion test. And this is what a correlation really looks like. At the bottom of the chart, you can see the RIT scores, which is the screening test scores. They range from about 140 to about 240. Along the y-axis, you see the state test scores. They range from about 300 to 400. And you can see that as you go across on the RIT scores, the scores on the state test are increasing, and that there's a real strong connection. If you were to draw a line through these data, it would be pretty much a straight line going through this blob of data, which is what it looks like when you have a very high correlation. In this case, the correlation was 0.86, which is excellent. And then if we took the predicted proficiency level and draw a line from that to the top of the graph and the state test cut score for being proficient in Minnesota, which is 350, you get an idea of where the hit rate comes from. We can see that about 53% of the students were predicted to be proficient and actually were proficient on the state test. We have another 33% that are predicted to be non-proficient on the state test, and they actually were. And then you've got the false positives, and false negatives, where we predicted low achievement, and we actually got high achievement. Here we predicted high achievement, and it didn't quite get there. But you can see that almost all of the data falls in these two quadrants. So this is what we call high degree of classification accuracy. And there are a number of different ways to specify classification accuracy. One of those terms is called specificity. Another term is sensitivity. It's the degree to which you want to, maximize your hit rates and make sure that you don't have a lot of false positives or false negatives. Well, there is a new analysis that's available on the statistics packages called ROC analysis, stands for Receiver Operating Characteristics, and this is probably the easiest way of seeing whether you have a high degree of classification accuracy. The standard that was set by the National Center was 0.9 for area below the curve on the ROC analysis. And I'm not going to go into detail on this, but again, you might see this in the technical manual, and this is the standard that we hope to see all screeners meet. Now, once you have your analysis that shows that you have a high degree of classification accuracy, how do you actually set the proficiency scores? There are a number of ways that you can do this. One is to use the actual ROC analysis that I showed you the graph from, and it'll show you what the outcomes will be in terms of hit rates if you move the cut score up or down the scale. Another way is logistic regression or discriminant analysis, and this is especially useful if you have a number of composite scores that are going to go into the total screening score. But what we use most frequently in Minneapolis is called equal percentile linking. And that's the simplest way, where if you had 100 students who had a pretest and a post-test score, you put all those scores in order for both the state test and for your screening test. And then you would see, well, let's go across and see at our 40th score, it's 340, which is partially proficient for the state test, and that's equivalent to a MAP score of 173. 350, which was proficient, we saw in our correlation graph, that was equivalent to 182. So if you were actually going to do classification accuracy study and find cut scores, one easy way to find the cut score is to use equal percentile linking. And again, I can answer more technical questions after the presentation. Then after you've done the initial analysis, it's a good idea to redo the study again the next year. We call this cross-validating the sample, and if you found that your cut score for CBM was 55 words correct the first time you did it, if you applied that same 55 words correct to next year's data, would you get the same kind of accuracy? And in general, we found very high cross-validation accuracy with the RIT scores for the MAP test, and we've also found very high cross-validation of CBM scores. And so now we get to the part that's probably most interesting for teachers and practitioners, which is how do you use this information? Now that you have a cut score for partially proficient and you have a cut score for proficient, how do you use this information within an RTI framework? And for these examples, I'm gonna show you our some web shots from our database that we have, every teacher in the district has access to their own classroom data. The names have been whited out here, so you couldn't see any individual student names. But these would be all students within one classroom, and it would show you whether the student has hit the RIT score that predicts proficiency or not on the state test in each of the areas of reading. So in the first student's case, vocabulary, literal comprehension, and interpretive comprehension are all below the partially proficient level. So they're in red. These are students that need, immediate consideration in the problem-solving model or the RTI model. Those in green are students that are on track to meet the standards. And this third student is green for both vocabulary and literal comprehension, but yellow for interpretive comprehension. And in that case, the student would be partially proficient or on track for partially proficient. The overall chance of hitting the standard is here in this column, and the final column just indicates whether the student made a year's growth or not using the RIT scores. But these first three columns, the red, yellow, and green, will give information to a teacher on, well, are most of the students in the class at green in vocabulary, or do we have a lot of red? And in this case, we have a lot of red and several yellows. In another area, they may have more green. So you can look at a classroom base, or you can look at individual students. Now on this website, if I would actually click on the scale score, this RIT score, you would get a specific ordering of the students, and you could see who are the students that are in red, and you could see what their scale scores were, and you could get, in this case, a reading and a math indication of whether the students are on track for the state proficiency. You can also go to a more specific sub-score level on the test. So if I know this student is low in terms of comprehension, if I click on this, it'll take me to an area in the website that shows students that typically score in this area are working on these areas where they would be reading 30-word passages, straightforward sequence of events, use clues for first, last, before, after, later, etc. So you get more specifics on the types of skills that they're working on, and these would be future skills. Now this student's very low, so it has very few secured skills. But for students that scored higher on the screener, they would have indications of the skills that have been secured already. So this is very valuable at the individual classroom level. We also get a report that clusters students. So this happens to be a clustering of the mathematics scores for the NWA MAP test. And it would show you which students are at approximately the same level in algebraic concepts, in computation. You can see there are a whole cluster of students that are very high in computation. There are some students that are very, very low in computation where we need to attend to those students in some of the basic skills. And then you also have data analysis and probability. So the teachers could use this information for flexible grouping and for targeting certain skills with certain students. So this gives you a beginning indicator of what our website looks like. I'm going to now take time out again to answer any questions that you have put in the question boxes here. And
Dr. Heisip, there's a number of questions, so if you are having trouble seeing them,
I see them now. I needed to click on the Manage box.
Great, great.
Thank you very much. We have a question here. At our school, we're using AIMSweb for universal screening. when we correlate our state assessment cut score, the oral reading fluency benchmark is much lower than the AIMSweb benchmark, so that we know that our state assessment has one of the lowest standards proficiency. If we stick to the AIMSweb cut scores, it has about 50% of our students needing intervention. This is an excellent question that really points to the fact that we kind of have to do some local setting of benchmarks at a level that's realistic for providing services. And so if the 50th percentile, or if we're getting 50% of the population going into the RTI model, into what we call our problem-solving model, we may not have resources to really take on 50%. And we may be wanting to screen more at the 30th percentile. And that's where you could take all of the scores that you're getting from your assessment, in this case the AIMSweb assessment, and do a linking study where you could use this equal percentile linking, and you find a score that's a little bit more in line with what your problem-solving model can handle. It is true that, as mentioned before, state tests are widely different, and in Massachusetts, if you set the screening benchmark at the proficiency level, you might have 70% of the students that would be not on track for proficiency. So you'd have to set a more realistic criterion. You might try to find a link to partially proficient, for example. Another question, what do you use the data analysis, or what do I use for data analysis software? Well, what we use here in Minneapolis is SPSS, the statistical package for social sciences. Another familiar one is SAS. Different states tend to use different software packages. Both of those would give you the capacity to do the equal percentile linking, would give you the ROC analysis, will give you a discriminant function with hit rates. So all of those standard packages for statistics can be used to do your analysis. Any stats package will give you a correlation. You want to make sure to use the Pearson correlation coefficient, and then you know, there are different bells and whistles with different packages, but the basic stuff is there in all packages. What is a RIT score is another question, and that's the scale score for the MAP test. And RIT is actually a Roche score. It's a kind of a technical term for a two-parameter Roche model, and NWA has been using the same RIT score for the last 30 years, and now their state assessments are calibrated to the RIT scale, and now in Minnesota we have so many districts using the MAP that we're thinking about calibrating our state assessment. But basically it's just a scale score that links from 2nd to 3rd to 4th to 5th grade on a continuous vertically linked scale. Katie asks, what do you recommend for screening in K1? I'm going to talk a little bit in the next section about what we use. We have a beginning of kindergarten assessment. We also do the assessment in the spring. We have some of the items that are given in the winter. So we have fall, winter, and spring screening for kindergarten and 1st grade. And what we do is we hire a cadre of retired teachers to go into each of our schools, and they sit for 10 or 15 minutes with each student doing an individualized assessment. And I'll get into a little bit more detail in the next section. So I think what I'll do is I'll move on to the next session and then come back to more questions, make sure that we answer as many questions as possible. The next slide really indicates what our benchmarks are using the curriculum-based measures that were developed in Minneapolis. And we've done renorming a couple different times. We changed reading series, and now we're kind of staying with passages that are independent of any one particular reading series. and we benchmarked them against the state test. So what you see in green would be what level of reading fluency you need to have to be 80% likely to be proficient on the state test in Minnesota. So at the end of first grade, it's 55 words per minute, which really predicts proficiency, and 30 words per minute that predicts partial proficiency. And we have a large population of students at each grade level, so we had no difficulty getting very accurate predictions all the way up through 8th grade. The correlations with the state tests are above 0.7 all the way up until I think you get to 8th grade, they drop down to about 0.69. But the correlations are excellent, and all standardized measures of curriculum-based measures that I've seen meet the standard if they're well established rules, decision rules for scoring. If you have a cadre of teachers administering the assessment rather than the classroom teacher doing it for their own students, you get a little higher reliability and validity. But in general, it's an excellent predictor. This is just a slide that shows when you sort it on our website, you get the names and the scores of each of the students at red, yellow, green, just like you did with the RIT scores for the MAP test. Then we put together what we call the National Reading Panel report on our website that would say what percentage of the students by grade level are meeting the proficiency for alphabetic principle, phonemic awareness, fluency and oral reading, and then the vocabulary, literal comprehension, and interpretive comprehension come from the MAP test. So this is a useful report that schools can see their whole school at a glance. Another report that is helpful to schools this is a grade 1 assessment that we do fall, winter, and spring, again with a cadre going out. They listen to the student read, calculate the words correct. We also do a prosodic features or how students stop at the end of punctuation, and if they're reading for comprehension, they have good inflection in their voice, etc. And then we ask comprehension questions at the end of each CBM passage. We give 3 passages, and at the beginning, the passages weren't all equated, and we took the mean of 3 passages. Now the passages have been equated very nicely, so we take the median of those 3 passages as the score. And then we look at our previous slide to see whether the students were on track to meet the state standards, and we reported out by, these are all high poverty schools on the north side of our city. You'd get a different picture if you looked at different areas of the city. We also have a report that looks by classrooms. So here you've got homeroom 102, 104, and 106, and it shows the benchmarks for being on track. And here you can see if the average for the classroom is on track, and you can see that there's some difference for room 106 being a little bit lower. But this is what a principal can use at a glance to look at fall, winter, and spring screening scores. Now this is getting at the question about what we use in kindergarten. We use an assessment, it's in the public domain, we call it the beginning of kindergarten assessment. Some of the items were borrowed from the University of Minnesota. They did a study, created measures that are called the IGDIS, I-G-D-I-S. I could get you the reference for the IGDIS, or you could contact me to find out more about our assessment. Basically, it has picture vocabulary, oral comprehension, read a simple story to students and ask questions. We have letter names and letter sounds. Those would be our alphabetic principle areas. Rhyming and alliteration. Alliteration would be the initial sound in the word. Rhyming, of course, is the end sounds. We combine those for phonemic awareness subtest score. We have concepts of print, and from that, I calculate a total composite score. And that score then is very predictive of future reading. We've linked the assessment to first grade reading, oral reading. We've linked it to the third grade proficiency and have very high correlations. Here's an early literacy screening report that came out this winter. It indicates the fluency levels, red, yellow, green. It includes the comprehension, letter sounds, and phoneme segmentation that we do in the winter, and then we do those measures again in the spring. We want to get the color coding for all of these measures so that teachers can see easily whether students are on track in each of the areas of pre-literacy. I think one of the slides, well, maybe I took that out, but the accuracy of the beginning of kindergarten assessment is tremendous. The correlation between our BKA and our third grade reading score 3 years later is 0.67. So, you know, there is a high degree of relationship between phonemic awareness, alphabetic principle. We have less of a correlation with our vocabulary measure, and we're looking for a better vocabulary measure. It basically is pictures of common nouns, and students who have a higher rate of fluency in identifying those common nouns do have higher reading comprehension at third grade. But the best predictors are really the alphabetic principle and the phonemic awareness. And as it indicates here, beginning of kindergarten composite score of 85 or higher predicts with 75% accuracy whether students will be proficient 3.5 years later. Then I want to just go through a couple of other areas besides the technical characteristics that we need to look at with our screeners, and then we'll finish up by answering some more questions. We want to make sure that the screener that we choose is generalizable to the population that we have. So in Minneapolis, we have 25% of our students who are English language learners, and 70% of the students are students of color. 65% are students receiving free or reduced price lunch. So we'd want to make sure that our screener has been validated on a similar type of population with that kind of diversity. And if it hadn't been, then we'd want to do our own studies to verify the reliability, validity, and classification accuracy. You also need to look at the efficiency of the screening tools. So, you know, the Woodcock Reading Mastery Test is an excellent reading test, but it takes an hour to administer individually to every student, so that wouldn't be a very good screener. We want to have a screener that's efficient with time, but then gives you sufficient information to drive your response to intervention program. We want to make sure that this screener is available with accommodations for special needs students, and we've established accommodations. We've also established rules for decisions regarding speech and language. We want to make sure that we're actually capturing reading and not some other construct. We want to make sure that the screener you know, isn't too expensive in terms of the cost per student or the cost per license. Now, when we hire a cadre of teachers to go out to screen all of the kindergarten, first grade, and second grade students in the district, it is rather expensive. But we think the cost benefit is there, because we know that you can't wait till third grade to intervene with students. We know that you have the greatest success with early intervention with children in kindergarten and first grade, and thus the cost, we spend $20 per hour for screeners to go out and do the screening is well worth it. We want to make sure that we have scores available that are useful. Some folks want national percentiles. we found that the district is less interested in percentiles than they are the criterion reference scores and whether you're on track for the standards, but you want to make sure that you have the scores that you need. And then we feel that a screener should be given at least twice a year, fall and winter. We have high mobility in our district, so we want to capture students that just came into the district. One of the interesting things about our website is that it's refreshed every evening so that students that come into your classroom new will show up in the website the next day. So you can see the whole history of preschool, from preschool all the way up through high school in terms of the early assessments, and then the MAP test that we give grades 3 through 8, and then the high school assessments. So now I want to go back up and look at some of the new questions that I haven't had a chance to answer. Let's take Isaac's question on the content. Okay, what is the content of MAP screening? The domains are mapped onto our state test. So there are 5 areas of mathematics: algebraic concepts, geometric concepts, computation, we have probability and statistics, and basic number sense. And in reading, we've got the 3 domains of vocabulary, literal comprehension, and inferential comprehension. So what you want to do is have a screener that does map onto your state test as much as possible if you're using the state test as your criterion measure. This question, let me see if I can scroll and see the end of it here. What other universal screeners do I recommend? Well, there's a website that's being put together by the American Institute on Research together with the National Center on Response to Intervention. That website is going to go through all the screeners that vendors have submitted technical information for, and we go through and we give strengths and weaknesses in each of the areas. We also talk about the amount of time it takes and how convenient the assessment is, but we really emphasize how well it predicts important outcomes in reading. We've done the reading reviews, and now we're going to start the math reviews. And I would recommend that folks go to that website to get recommendations. I've mentioned the MAP test. There are other similar tests to the MAP test that are computer adaptive. The Reading Renaissance company has what's called the STAR test, the STAR Reading, STAR Math. Those are very similar to the MAP test. They're computer adaptive and have high reliability. But there are other new measures being developed all the time, so I don't want to go through a laundry list of potential screeners. It's just important to see that they've been reviewed and found to meet the standards of the National Center. High school screeners is a big question. The MAP test does go up through 10th grade, so it's possible to use the MAP reading or math assessments. We find that there aren't very many assessments that have been validated for high school use. I know that Read 180 folks have an assessment that's a computer adaptive assessment that can be used in high school. But hopefully we'll have some high school measures submitted to our center so that we can review them. But we definitely do need to get more high school measures. In Minneapolis, it says we created our own curriculum-based measures. I'm going to see if I can expand the question a little bit. I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing it. Yes, we created our own measures. before some of these other companies were in existence. So Minneapolis actually predates the work that was done on the Dibbles and predates our colleague work with the other measures in other states. We found that it was helpful initially to have it linked to our reading series. So we changed, whenever we changed reading series, we came up with new curriculum-based indicators. But we've really found that universal screeners need not be tied directly to any one particular reading series, and so now we're using more generalized measures. I seem to be having difficulty opening any of the other questions on the screen. I'm wondering if I could get some help from the
Sure.
staff.
Sure. We will read.
Can you read
the
one of the questions for me?
Yeah. One of the questions is, what is the RIT scale? And,
Yeah, we
and
covered.
similarly, what is the RIT acronym?
Yeah, that's a Roche model scale. R stands for Roche, and it doesn't really have meaning beyond that. It's a scale score that links all the assessment scores from second grade all the way up through 9th to 10th grade. So it's a vertically linked scale, and whereas most state tests have scale scores only for a particular grade level, this scale score works through the whole construct of reading and math.
Another question is, how long did the process take from start to finish, and how long are the norms good for?
Yeah, we tend to re-norm every time the state standards change, and in Minnesota they change the standards every 4 or 5 years, and so we'll go in and recalibrate our instruments to the new standards. If your state standards would stay the same, you might still want to recalibrate as your population changes. So general rule of thumb is every 3 to 5 years to recalibrate to make sure that your screening cutoff scores still work.
Another question is the MAPS appropriate for middle or high school age students?
Yes, the MAP test we use in Minneapolis is good for middle school and up through 9th grade. I don't know of any schools in Minnesota that are using in 10th grade, but I think there are some schools nationally that are using the assessment in 10th grade as well. You tend to top out a little bit on some of the math measures. There aren't enough college and graduate school level questions. And so if a student gets all the answers correct, then it's basically an invalid score. So you have to have enough high level items for the bank to be used at those upper grades.
Just a clarification on another question, is the assessment data integrated in your student information system?
Yes, the assessment data is part of our student information system, and then that data is exported to our website every night, so that the reports that you see here are just one of maybe 100 of different views where you can see the assessment data, the attendance, the suspensions, and a whole host of indicators on school success that are available to the teachers. So the data are entered, the CBM data are entered into the OCR screening portal, and they're made available that way. The rest of the data come from our central data system and are exported every night.
In regard to the time for individual assessment, what do you recommend when you say brief? How much time?
Well, the CBM measures, we do 3 one-minute measures, and with the comprehension, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to do the whole assessment. There are the short version of the map, I think, is like 20 minutes, I would say anything that takes, up to half an hour might be considered brief. But in general, we recommend, efficiency, so that even though for one student it might only take 10 minutes, you don't want the time of the teacher to be too great. And that's why we use a cadre to do our assessment, so that the teacher time away from instruction is minimized as much as possible.
A person asked if the reports, the green, red, and yellow reports, are available to people outside of the district.
No, the classroom teachers can see their own students, but not another classroom. The principal and the teacher leaders that are given access by the principal can see the whole school. The district administrator can see the whole district. So there are different levels of access, and there's a firewall around the data so that nobody can access the data from outside. And so we keep high security on individual student names and their test scores.
And if you worked in a small district with, let's say, 80 to 100 students per grade, would you be able to obtain good predictive validity on the data or the screening in just 1 year?
Yeah, in Minnesota, they've put together a version of the map that's good for the whole state, and the calibration has been done in enough different districts, so it could be used in small districts, medium-sized, and large districts in the state, and it has a diverse enough population. So if a group or consortium of small districts get together, they could do a screening, but a screening assessment, you'd need about 100 to 200 students per grade level to really do an adequate classification study, and that's why it's nice to combine with other districts. Whenever possible, though, it's good to have something that's aligned directly to your state that could be used by all districts in the state. Are there any other questions?
There are a few more questions. I'm wondering if we just try and wrap it up now, or go through a few more questions, post all the answers on our website. What is your suggestion for time? Are you okay with answering a couple more?
I'm fine if people want to hang on for a little extra.
Okay, then let's, one person asked about, when it comes to these universal screeners, what about accommodations for special education students?
Yes, with our map testing, we have accommodations using paper and pencil where necessary, large print, separate environments. We do have the capacity for tapes for the math, so you can have the math questions read either aloud or using a tape. We have translations available in 4 different languages in Minneapolis. It's Somali, Hmong, and Spanish. So we do want to make sure that all the accommodations that are available for our state test are also available for the screener. We do have some sites that are native language literacy sites where they are teaching English at the beginning in kindergarten, first grade. So we've translated our CBM passages into those languages for the native language literacy sites as well.
And then the final question is, for your beginning kindergarten assessment, what different tools do you use, or is it one particular tool?
It's all combined into one tool called the Beginning of Kindergarten Assessment. We have a cadre of retired teachers that are trained how to do it reliably. They have kind of an easel of cards that they're showing children for the identification of vocabulary, and then they have a standard CBM kind of letter sounds and letter names. And then we stole some other items from state tests around the country that were in the public domain. So it's an amalgam of different instruments put into a 10 to 15 minute time frame. We do send it out to districts if they agree to be trained and use the instrument appropriately, and people can email it me if they're interested.
And that concludes the questions that have come through the Q&A section. We'd like to thank Dr. Heisted for sharing his experiences today. It was really very informative. If you would like to print a copy of the PowerPoint slides from today's presentation, you may do so by clicking the small printer icon at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. This will allow you to print to PDF. The slides will also be available on the National Center on Response to Intervention's website, which is www.rti4success.org, and that's the number 4 in there. Also, Dr. Heisted had mentioned the screening tools chart, and that will be shortly posted on that same website that we mentioned, rti4success.org. If you have additional questions about universal screening or setting district benchmarks, please email them to us at rtiwebinars@air.org. We would appreciate your feedback about today's session. As you will notice on the final screen, please take a few minutes to complete the webinar evaluation. We value your feedback, and ultimately your suggestions will assist us in making decisions about future webinars. Once again, thank you for participating today. Thank you, Dr. Heisted.
Thank you.